This is the best-selling robot in China, with a price tag of nearly $140,000 apiece. It racked up 13,000 pre-orders in less than a month. That's 12 times more than this massive company sold of all its other full-sized robots combined over the entire previous year. At the same time, it doesn't do backflips, it doesn't work in a factory, it doesn't cook, and it doesn't carry groceries. It can't even climb stairs. In its base version, it literally has no legs. So what is so special about it? Well, actually, it's exactly what people have been waiting for from robots for a long time, and it's not what you might think. June 30th, Shenzhen. UB Tech's massive event traditionally opens with a dance. It doesn't look especially graceful, but only until you realize what the catch is, because the girl in this dance duo is the exact robot everyone came here to see at a presentation under the slogan Endless Love. Journalists jumped on it immediately, and the headlines speak for themselves. The topic is hot, and the robots are realistic and pretty attractive. They didn't ignore the female audience either, introducing a robot that looks like it was pulled straight out of a romance novel. We've already talked about adult robots from Robotics or EX Robots. If you haven't seen that video yet, the link will be at the end. At first, it seems like nothing new. The same silicone, the same face, the same heavy reliance on looks. But there is one detail here that changes everything. These stunning robots weren't released by some company that just molds silicon dolls and calls them robots. They were built by the engineers at UB Tech, one of the largest robotics manufacturers in China. Their machines work in Audi, BYD, Geely, and NIO factories, assembling modern cars, and on Foxconn assembly lines, making complex electronics. Not long ago, their robots danced in front of hundreds of millions of viewers on China Central Television. That is already serious status, and after the company raised massive investments on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, it basically reached the status of an absolute national treasure. China's biggest humanoid manufacturer is putting its entire reputation on the line for this questionable market. Engineers are being reassigned from automotive assembly lines to build silicone dolls, and the final product is a machine with soft skin that costs about as much as a high-end luxury car. Why? At the presentation, the U1 looks like the future. Full height, lifelike facial expressions, dancing, eye contact, emotional AI. In the promo video, it's practically human, but if you open up the specs, there's less future in there than it seems. The headline number on the slides is 88 degrees of freedom. That number is supposed to mean the total count of independent movements the robot can make. Sounds solid, almost like something out of a NASA lab, but in this case, it's just the grand total of all joints, including passive ones that don't move on their own. The Pro version has 24 active joints. The most expensive Ultra version has 62, which is already not bad, but literally nobody gets the advertised 88 in full. Moving on. The most affordable version, the U1 Lite for $16,500, is actually just half a body, a torso with no legs, and that's for the price of a good car. But even if you buy the full robot for $140,000, it's a real question whether it can even walk. At the hands-on booth where journalists were allowed, the robot mostly just blinked and turned its head. The dialogue had delays of several seconds, and the audio didn't always match the lip movements. As for actual walking and gripping, they didn't really show that live at all. What they did show though was a waltz. The female version of the U1 dances with a partner in a La La Land style. Some people in the audience couldn't even figure out which of the two was the robot. And then it turns out the girl is the robot and the man holding her up is a real living dancer. Chinese tech reviewers wrote that this was basically just a trick to pull the wool over the audience's eyes. The most savage comment went something like this: "The robot girl dances so-so, but the robot guy looks great right after her. Except the robot guy was human." And that's exactly why tech journalists ended up calling the U1 a pricey statuette. It sounds harsh, but there's some truth to it. It doesn't mop floors, it doesn't cook, and it doesn't climb stairs. It can't even swap its own battery, even though the factory Walker S2 from the very same UB Tech can do exactly that. The robot's battery lasts only 2 to 4 hours. On top of that, you can't even recode or modify it at all. The company explicitly bans any secondary development. In other words, UB Tech's factory robot is more autonomous, more useful, and offers more freedom than UB Tech's domestic companion robot. But there is one area where the company truly went all out. And that's the face. Beneath the robot's skin are thousands of parts, assembled into a system with dozens of axes. They claim it can pull off over 30 micro-expressions. Plus, the self-locking neck is designed to hold the head in position even when the robot is turned off, saving battery power completely. But the real masterpiece here is the skin. The silicone, complete with pores, veins, and even fingerprints, looks absolutely spectacular. The eyelashes and eyebrows are implanted by hand, hair by hair. Yep, automation hasn't reached this part yet. All this high-tech ends right where an engineer has to pick up a pair of tweezers. Now for the brains. The intelligence is powered by their proprietary Resonance LM model. At its core, it's a conversational chatbot, but it's been fine-tuned not just to answer questions, but to trigger a sense of intimacy. The robot analyzes your voice, speech tempo, facial expressions, and mood. But most importantly, it remembers. The key word in the product description is cultivation. During conversations, the robot memorizes your habits, moods, and shared history, gradually tailoring its character to fit you. In theory, the more you talk to it, the better it's supposed to understand you specifically. In other words, you aren't paying for a robot that will make your chores easier, and you aren't paying for a sci-fi humanoid butler. You're shelling out cash for a lifelike face, device memory, and the feeling that someone close to you is right there. The U1 does almost nothing, and at the same time, it does a hell of a lot. It provides a sense of presence and solves the problem of loneliness. And that is exactly why this whole adult robot angle is both completely misunderstood and incredibly accurate. Let's take a look at what the adult doll industry itself has turned into over the last few years. At first, it was pretty crude: a silicone body, anatomy, and physical function. Over time, they added faces, animatronics, blinking, and basic facial expressions to the dolls. Then came voice and character traits. Large language models turned the dolls' simple phrases into full-blown conversations, allowing them to sell the illusion of connection. The founder of WM Doll explained it simply: in the past, dolls satisfied physical needs, but now technology has given them emotional value. Sex is a brief encounter, but intimacy is a long-term state that customers are willing to pay for year after year. That is the key. Even the adult industry realized that the main product is something else entirely. The story of Real Doll is the perfect example here. The company's founder, Matt McMullen, started back in the 90s as a sculptor of hyper-realistic dolls. For years, he kept saying he wasn't just creating a sex toy, but trying to blur the line between a sculpture and a living being. From the very beginning, this wasn't just a market for bodies, it was a market for bringing them to life. And to push that direction forward, the company launched a separate brand, Robotics. It was McMullen who introduced the sensational Aria robot at the major CES 2025 tech show. This is an emotional companion, completely stripped of any anatomical features. The developers themselves admitted that their ties to the adult industry were holding them back from attracting funding. Meanwhile, the loneliness industry is just kicking into high gear, and money is pouring into it. On top of that, demand for a companion is high everywhere. From hospitals and hotels to nursing homes, everyone just needs someone to talk to heart to heart. UB Tech arrived at the exact same conclusion, which is why they created this new robot with such a lifelike face, so that you would want to form an emotional attachment to it. Officially, the company completely distances itself from the adult industry. They describe the U1 as a companion who will always be there for you and will never tell you they're tired of you. Yet at the same time, they admit that in 10 to 20 years, people might actually fall in love with humanoid robots. So with one hand, the company pushes away the word sex, while with the other, it gently leaves the word romance on the table. And the most interesting part is that UB Tech keeps quiet about whether the U1 has any intimate anatomy. In that light, the ban on recoding and modification looks suspiciously convenient. On one hand, it allows the brand to stay family-friendly, investor-approved, and respectable, since only the company gets to decide what this robot can be. On the other hand, the user ends up with a closed black box they have zero control over, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, let's figure out why UB Tech even got into this in the first place. To understand that, let's look at the company's founder, Joe Jan. A woodworking major by education, he had managed to build his own successful business in that field by the time he was 30. He owned apartments in Shenzhen, cars, and had a stable income, until he got fired up by a crazy idea. In 2008, he saw Honda's Asimo in Japan and became obsessed with a dream. But at that time, that kind of technology simply didn't exist in China, so Jian decided to change that, starting with the most expensive and complex part of a robot, the servo actuators. These are the high-tech joints that make the robot's body move exactly the way it's supposed to. China had no such tech back then. All the components were bought from abroad, making up the lion's share of a robot's cost. No big deal, Zhou Jian thought. I'll spend a couple of years and a couple of million, and I'll get it done. But it wasn't that simple. It took him years and tens of millions, money he didn't have. Eventually, Jian sold off all his property and started borrowing money from his father. When the family was selling their very last apartment, Zhou's father, in a fit of rage, actually unscrewed a high-end toilet and took it with him, saying it was worth money too. It's both tragic and hilarious. It got to the point where Zhou couldn't even scrape together enough cash for a dentist appointment for himself and his mother. His credit cards were maxed out and his credit history was completely ruined. All that was left was a former millionaire who had bet everything on a mechanical joint that still didn't work, but he didn't give up, and in 2012, he finally broke through that barrier. UB Tech rolled out a commercial servo actuator that was several times cheaper than its foreign competitors. From then on, things just snowballed. First, they created a small dancing robot called Alpha. Then they sent 540 of these machines to perform on China's main New Year's TV gala. Later, they developed a full-sized industrial humanoid named Walker. And finally, they hit the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. On December 29th, 2023, Zhou takes the company public. Ringing the IPO bell right beside him is his robot, the world's first publicly traded humanoid robotics manufacturer. The man who once sold his apartment, toilet included, now stands before the entire financial world next to the machine he built. But behind this beautiful picture lies a financial catastrophe. The robots and breakthroughs are there, but the profit is not. The company's accumulated deficit over the last 5 years has approached 6 billion yuan. That's roughly 800 million US dollars. In some years, their net losses actually exceeded their revenue. In other words, the company spent more on robots than it actually made from them. Industrial humanoids aren't swooping in to save the day just yet either. Over the entire year of 2025, UB Tech sold just over 1,000 full-sized robots. A drop in the bucket for a giant like this. In certain years, R&D swallowed up to 70% of their entire budget. Now it's around a quarter, but even that is enough to keep the company spending way more on robots than they actually make from them. Against this backdrop, it must be downright painful for the company to watch competitors like Unitree. This younger company builds simpler, louder, cheaper robots, loads them up with backflips and viral videos, and turns a profit. Meanwhile, the decorated titan keeps bleeding cash. In the end, when a company has been burning through cash for 14 years straight, it doesn't need yet another flashy demo. It needs a brand new revenue stream capable of pulling it out of the gutter. And the U1 is exactly that. An attempt to pivot into a new market. Instead of waiting for factories to start buying humanoids in bulk, they are going where the demand and the money already are, and where people don't necessarily care if a robot can walk perfectly. Because if you're selling a factory robot, it has to hit KPIs. It needs to carry, twist, lift, swap its own battery, work back-to-back shifts, and make economic sense in an Excel spreadsheet. But if you're selling a companion, the economics change completely. A factory demands hard efficiency reports, while an ordinary human being just wants to feel like there's someone else in the room, and they are willing to pay for that feeling under a completely different set of rules. There are around 240 million single adults living in China. That is a colossal number, larger than the entire population of most major countries on the planet. Among people aged 25 to 29, over half are unmarried. Over the last decade alone, the number of marriages plunged from 13.5 million to just 6 million. One reason is a massive demographic imbalance, which has left tens of millions more men than women. And the fact that these people are ready to form an emotional attachment to an interface is already proven. Back in 2016, Xiaois, a Chinese chatbot that racked up hundreds of millions of users, started receiving millions of love confessions. Most of them were sent late in the evening or in the middle of the night, the exact time when the phone screen glows brightest and the loneliness gets loudest. Another prime example is the market for so-called autumn games. This is a Japanese term for interactive romance simulators designed specifically for a female audience. Millions of women don't buy these games for sex, they buy them for attention and care. It's that magical feeling that the perfect man is choosing you. As a result, these digital boyfriend games have raked in hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, take a look at the male model model of the U1, 6 feet tall, a tailored suit, thin-rimmed glasses. This isn't a random design. This is the exact image of the successful but cold boss from popular TV shows and novels who, according to the plot, falls in love with an ordinary girl. Now, this character has been pulled straight off the screen and placed right into the buyer's room, and the female model works on the exact same principle. She doesn't need to assemble a car or carry heavy boxes. She just needs to have that one specific look in her eyes that someone has been searching for their entire life. It turns out UB Tech isn't selling a man or a woman. They're selling a customizable object of attachment, the perfect match for anyone. An object that is physically present in your home. There she is, sitting right next to you, turning her head toward you. You can see her out of the corner of your eye, and that is exactly what creates the feeling that the loneliness in the room is finally gone. And it's important here not to slide into cheap cynicism. For some people, a robot like this could genuinely be a lifeline. An elderly person who would otherwise spend the entire day in total silence. A person living with a disability. Someone grieving a loss. A teenager who is too terrified to say certain things out loud. An isolated adult who texts a chatbot at night because they have no living person left to text. AI companions didn't just appear out of thin air. They grew out of the empty spaces in human society. And this is exactly where the biggest trap is hidden. You have absolutely zero control over the entity you've grown attached to. Just look at the companion app Replika, which has an audience of 30 million users. In February 2023, they woke up in a completely different reality. Under pressure from regulators, the company simply wiped out the bot's romantic behavior. People who had been with their AI partners for years described it as a lobotomy of a loved one. One man considered himself married to his replica. After the update, he said she became a mere shadow of her former self. Forums literally had to pin suicide hotline numbers at the top because for some users, this became a profound tragedy. Everyone knows the story of the Japanese man Akihiko Kondo who married a hologram of Hatsune Miku, a popular virtual character, back in 2018. But what not everyone knows is that in 2020, the service that powered the hologram was shut down and he could no longer speak to her. Now, he is the world's first digital widower. With a physical robot like the U1, the stakes are even higher. You fork over a fortune for silicone, motors, and hand-implanted eyelashes and get a physical body right in your apartment, but its personality still lives entirely on the company's servers. And one day, your expensive robot could easily turn into a glorified pile of scrap metal. You can't recode it and you can't freely modify it. The next update could alter its character, filters, memory, behavior, or the boundaries of intimacy. Today it's one entity. Tomorrow the company decides that this behavior is unacceptable, too risky, doesn't meet the guidelines, or is bad for the brand. And therein lies the trap. You buy the body, but the soul is held hostage by the company. And this is the main terrifying twist of the whole story. The most expensive part of the robot isn't the skin, the motors, or the eyes. The most expensive part is the feeling that it is yours. Yet that is the exact part you own the least. You could say, well, that's how it is with all digital services. And that's true, except in the past, a company could change an app's user interface. Now they can change the entity looking back at you from your own couch. And when people form attachments to these systems, the consequences are very real. In February 2024, a 14-year-old teenager in Florida took his own life after months of communicating with a chatbot, leading his mother to file a lawsuit against the company. Tragedies like this have forced governments around the world to seriously consider regulation. For instance, in California, a specific law governing companion bots went into effect on January 1st, 2026. Society and regulators are finally beginning to understand that this is no longer a toy or just some random chat room. It brings a human being comfort, but it is ultimately controlled by a company that can change the rules at any given moment. Now, let's put it all together. For years, the adult industry built bodies until it realized it could sell souls too. That's how we got talking dolls, AI modules, real Robotics, Aria, and the newly coined term, companion. Meanwhile, the robotics industry spent years building function, but function is expensive, slow to pay off, and demands flawless engineering. In search of a fix for its economic troubles, UB Tech turned to faces, eyelashes, romance games, and emotional models. And by the way, this market is already getting crowded. There's a full-blown war going on out there over whose gaze is more convincing. Inside the Ameca robot, dozens of motors control facial expressions. In the Aheadform project, cameras are mounted directly inside the robot's eyeballs, and the developers at EX Robots have pushed the realism of silicone figures to such an extreme that people at tech expos mistake them for live actors. WM Doll and Starperry are moving from dolls toward emotional models. UB Tech is moving from factories toward a domestic companion. This isn't just some weird, isolated story about a Chinese cyberwife. This is a brand new market formula. It is highly possible that the long-promised robot of the future won't show up to wash your dishes first. It will show up to listen to how your day went. And for corporations, that is a whole lot more profitable, because a functional robot has to compete with a vacuum cleaner, a delivery guy, a factory worker, a caregiver, or an actual human earning a wage. But an emotional robot? It only competes with an empty room. And as you can imagine, the empty room loses almost every single time. And that is exactly what Joe Jan realized. He doesn't look at all like a man who dreamed of selling loneliness. He built his company on an almost religious faith in robotics. He wanted to prove that China could build highly complex machines. He burned through a fortune and endured humiliation, all for the sake of a servo actuator, a fist-sized part meant to make a robot walk like a human. It was this exact part that brought him to an IPO, and it was this exact part that for 13 years flat out refused to turn a profit. As a result, the company is now being rescued by a robot that, in its base version, literally has no legs. The very joint he sold his apartments for is the thing that still doesn't work the way it should. Instead, the orders are rolling in thanks to a face, hand-implanted eyelashes, and a gaze. A robot that doesn't need to go anywhere to make the buyer fall for it. For 13 years, the company couldn't make money on machines that actually work, and in the end, they arrived at a robot that can do almost nothing. But it's a robot you can make a fortune on, because people love it. After the U1 demonstration, one man wrote, "The look I've been searching for my entire life, I found in a robot. The look wasn't real, but he recognized it anyway." And that is what they are building an entire industry on now.